Okay, well, welcome everyone to our We Can Do Better conversation. And so today we actually have a really cool topic, and I'm excited to have both Andrea and Teresa joining us for this for our conversation. I think this is number 4 in our series, so this is going to be a really cool conversation that we're having. So really, I think this came as a result of a conversation that we were having with you, Teresa, and we kind of started talking about this idea of bringing being ourselves and the energy that goes into being someone else. So that kind of spun this idea for a conversation because it's something that actually we can all relate to, right? At some point or the other, this idea of, am I being myself? Am I not being myself? So really our conversation today is around what makes a person choose to be someone that he or she is not versus being themselves. You know, one of the things that comes up really frequently nowadays is this saying around lead with your whole self. You know, bring your whole self to work or to any exercise or any work that you're doing. And I feel like that actually just automatically necessitates that you're bringing yourself. Like when your whole self is coming, is yourself is coming. But at the same time, that's not the reality that's actually happening. And knowing the amount of energy that goes into doing this, what we'd like to actually just start by exploring is, why do we then choose to be someone else when it actually takes a lot more energy to be someone else? So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this, what comes to mind when we just even start exploring that conversation.
So much energy wasted in trying to be who you're not. I remember when I was quite young, and by quite young, I mean, I think 12, 13, something like that. And my mom had an image as to what I was supposed to look like. And I still have the blue eyes. They didn't all of a sudden change. But when I was young, my hair was blonde and curly and ringlet. So I had this kind of look very opposite to my mother, who's Italian and is like dark olive skin, dark hair. So from her perspective, as a girl with this kind of appearance, I also needed to be in dresses. And she said to me on more than one occasion, if you would just wear lipstick, you would be so much prettier. And so I thought, well, that's interesting, and would put on the chapstick or the lipstick for her, and immediately had this overwhelming sense of, ugh. And that's kind of the only way I can describe it, because it was an emotional feeling more so than it was a logical one. But from a young age, I was able to connect almost immediately. The lipstick came off and the dress came off and the pants went on because I wanted to go outside and play. And that whole sense of the connection between, oh, that feeling is you're being someone you're not, that isn't aligned with what your values are as an individual, but who you are as a person. It's really important to respect who you are, because if you don't, this is the feeling that goes with it. And I so did not like the feeling. It made it very easy from that point forward to whenever someone asked me to be or imposed something on me to be who I wasn't, I was like, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you. Because it was always accompanied with the feeling.
Right. So that's actually really interesting, is actually very perceptive at a very young age to pick up that icky feeling.
Yeah.
Right. And to choose to do something differently. I wonder how many of us have had that icky feeling as kids, or, you know, at later times, but have just kind of opted to ignore that. Like I can personally think and go like, I probably have ignored that feeling quite often. So that actually is interesting. You talked about your parents' influence just as a starting point, in terms of this idea of like who I should be, right? Versus who I actually am. That's actually really interesting. What other thoughts are there around this idea of why we might choose to actually be someone else, despite the icky feeling that Teresa talked about?
I can totally relate with Teresa. For me, and I think for others, as far as my friends or past coworkers, being someone that you're not was sometimes just something you did for survival, day to day. There's no lonelier feeling than not belonging somewhere. There's no lonelier feeling than not being accepted. Sometimes just the fact of just being accepted or belonging to some people, that's how they determine their worth. So without, sadly, right? But without that, they really know no other way to live. And it is quite exhausting, putting on a facade, putting on a new character each day, a new role just to fit in. I came from a very strict background, and I've had some very strict workplaces that were very demanding. And you know, as you're growing up and finding out who you are, you really don't know who you are. And if you have that on top of you, like trying to use that for survival, it's going to be even harder to find who you are. Not even realize that really getting acquainted with yourself to you're like later in life, like midlife. And that's kind of like what happened to me. When that kind of shining epiphany came through that I really am not this person after all. It's really freeing, but it does take courage, and it's an awful lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It is a lot of work, and you bring me to this thought, Andrea, and also Teresa, in terms of expectation of others, right? So we come into the world as infants, as babies, so we have to have support and help and nurturing from the beginning, right? And so we have influencers, and so we get crafted sort of through their lens in terms of who we should be. What are our expectations in terms of behavior? And I think back to one of the videos I did in terms of be nice versus be kind, and being shaped in terms of our lens on that, right? But there's all kinds of things like that that kind of become part of who we are until maybe we get into, you know, teenagers or adulthood, and we start to think for ourselves, and there's this incongruence that comes up, right? It's like, no, that's not me. And why do I suppress that? Why do I mute myself? Why don't I choose to be myself? And that's where I think there's richness in exploring this. It's something to some extent I expect all of us have felt. And back to Teresa's talking about, it's a feeling, right? For me, it was incongruence at different stages. And it's like, why not be me? Why is that the way to do it? Or why you just start questioning? And not in judgment, but just wait a minute, maybe there's just a different way I can be. And maybe, you know, what if I was just myself? Maybe that would be freeing. And so freedom was sort of my story around that. It involves freedom and being myself, because there is less energy in that takes more courage in some cases to get there, as Andrea was talking about in terms of courage. But what if we chose to be courageous, be ourselves, step out, and live by our own expectations, and honoring self before honoring the opinions and expectations of others? What's possible?
I think a lot of people step into the mask wearing or accept the imposition of what you should be. One, from this heightened sense of needing to be accepted, and two, stemming from not self-accepting. So if I like myself, if I like who I am, it's a little bit easier to reject imposed characteristics, imposed expectations of who you are from other people. So that was my experience from even younger than 11. I grew up, and some people may call it by the grace of God. That's what I was like. I don't remember a different way. I always remember I liked who I was, and I always remember having the equal thought process of, well, if you don't like it, there's nothing I could do about that, because this is who I am. And so I can hope that you would accept me and be my friend, but that might not always happen. And I'm kind of okay with that, because there's all of these people who do like me for who I am. And I didn't have a drive or a necessity for everyone to. Now, I think there's also this distinction between, as individuals, we will have sort of a number. There's a certain amount of people we need to have in our tribe to feel accepted, belonged. And if we don't have that number, we might seek it out. And then that's perhaps when we put the mask on to get to whatever that number is. And for some people, they're like, you know, if I've got two or three close friends, and that's all I really need. And I'm satisfied and I'm fulfilled with that. And others are like, I have 50 and I'm satisfied and I'm fulfilled with that. And as soon as we drop below that tribe number, we tend to need to seek it out because we're missing a component that fills us. And because we're so unique like that, I think it's necessary for us to remember as part of humanity that each person is unique like that. And so sometimes understanding that concept is how we create inclusion and acceptance and diversity and allow people to be who they are, and they have the honesty behind saying something like, I realize you need another person in your tribe. I'm not going to be that person, but I wish you all the best in finding one that will be.
That's a really, I love that connection between self-acceptance being the first place. And it's so true, right? Like even when we think about talking about, compassion towards other people, it's the same thing. Like if I have limited compassion for myself, chances are my ability to be compassionate to somebody else is also limited by that. It's framed by how I view myself. If I make mistakes, then I'm probably going to be just as heightened and critical about others. Like it's hard to extend something different to somebody else that we don't extend to ourselves just because we don't know any different. So I love what you shared. I think there's so much power in us being able to be that way with ourselves. And I don't know, like I love what you're saying, Teresa, about the fact that you don't remember another way. I wish more of us were like, I don't know another way. I always just felt like this, right? But I know that that's not the reality, right? I can speak even for myself. That is not the reality. And so I relate very much with what you said, Andrea, around this sense of like, it's almost an awakening that happens. It's a process that's happened over time. And I'm not even going to say I've arrived. It's just something that is an ongoing process. But what I got really curious about is how important is it for us to have role models in this, right? I think about who are role models for any of you. Even I'm curious that you were able to see that. And that was part of where that was a bit of the inkling of the aha to say, oh, like there's another way of being. Like what does that look like for you in terms of your surroundings? I'm curious.
I saw more of the opposite. So I saw more of people who weren't showing up as themselves and the pain that was causing them. And that was confirmation for me that I didn't want to go down that road.
Gotcha.
It is not to say that I didn't have moments in my life where I was like, in order to be liked here, or in order to be loved by this boy that I really like, I'll do something maybe a little bit different. Like I'll grow my hair out because I got these messages that say, if you wear lipstick, you'll be prettier, right? Yeah. So those were there. And I certainly made decisions to grow my hair out or do something like that to be liked or to be loved. And the whole time felt that, yeah. So I had more examples of the pain that people were going through by not being their true selves all the time. So when you get close to people, you get to see the faces and you kind of go, man, that looks really hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pain is a good motivator, right? To do something different. So sorry, Andrea, you're going to say something.
No, I was saying I can relate completely with Teresa. Of course, there's tons of role models and people that are inspirational that kind of give you that extra push, or at least at the very least say, oh, there is another way that to live or to actually be myself. But really, I've always enjoyed reading those things and going to hear them speak. But really what got me, my turning point was when I became a mom. When I became a mom, I wanted to instill in my kids that they could be themselves no matter what. I didn't want them to go through what I did. I didn't want them to feel like they weren't good enough and that their worth came always from other people. So that in itself changed my attitude, and kind of at the same time, while I was trying to instill that in them, I was kind of reparenting myself. So if I could choose one point where my awakening started, it would be that.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome, Andrea. And so what comes up for me in this is a couple of things. First is this notion of muting yourself. And so I got a message early on in a couple of different circumstances not to stand out. And I was shy to begin with, so that was easy to step into that, right? So shy person, don't stand out. And then a little bit back to what Teresa was talking about, I've always been that way. People ask me sometimes, what's it like to be a twin? I'm like, I don't know any different. I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but like, I just don't know any different. I've got a brother, he's always kind of been with me. It's like, and so you made me think of that when you were sharing your point about you've always been that way. And so there's this point of muting yourself and kind of learning to play small, both from role models and from messaging. And so then we get to our adult life, and it's not about standing out to kind of push others down, but it's to shine your own brilliance. And that's a lot of the work we do now, is to unleash human greatness and have people appreciate one another's brilliance and uniqueness and step into our own too. And so I think there's a lot of that too. And so the other aspect I'll share is someone else recognizing that and getting me on the path of becoming a coach. It's like, you should go to Georgetown. I see this in you. And it's ironic because being a coach or going into people and professional development or team development, I've always been part of that world just in the sports realm, right? And I've always been a leader in that place. And so we'll bring this back to leadership too, in terms of what does this topic mean for being a leader? And so that pathway was like, oh, it felt right, but I never would have seen myself being able to move into that kind of a career unless someone held up a mirror and say, I see this in you, because of what my mindset and my conditioning had been different. I was like, oh, okay. And then it became a journey of shifting a mindset around vulnerability that opened things up too. And everybody's got, I think, a story around that helps them step into who they are. But we're on a spectrum, right? And we're at different places at different points in time, and it's all good, right?
Yeah. I really like what you shared about someone else recognizing that in us. I can definitely say that that's my experience as well. Like at times in my life where someone else has seen something in me that I was not able to see. And as you're talking about that, it's making me think about how often am I aware of doing that for somebody else? Like as in, am I really looking and seeing somebody for who they are, what they're capable of, their potential? And sometimes, like in the busyness of things, I feel I may miss that in other people. But I think that brings it back to, if you can't see that in yourself, then it makes it harder to be able to recognize and be aware of picking up on that in other people. So I think one of the, like, even as we're talking right now, like one of my takeaways really is be very aware, like intentional about picking out from myself, like what are you seeing as potential for yourself? Because I think that habit will help me to be more focused in doing that for somebody else as well. It won't just reside. You talked about the leadership piece, Brian. I'm so curious, like being yourself. I think about a lot of leaders who step into leadership, and definitely I can say that is not the case, that's not what happens. It's not always there. Like it's not that person that's showing up in that leader space. So I'm curious, like if we were to think about it from that position, from a leadership position, what happens? Like what causes us to kind of like when we sit in that role all of a sudden to be like, oh, I'm just gonna think I should be somebody else at this point now that I've got this role. Like what happens at that point?
And so it's a journey, right, to being self, right? And so even leader, whatever role you're in, you're always with yourself, right? And so there's this notion of we have to change and grow, right? And so this relationship with ourselves is always, for me, a starting point most often, I should say, when I'm working with clients or when I'm creating personal change, it's always looking inward first. And so it's this sort of notion of inward out, right, in terms of growth. And so as a leader too, it's, rather than kind of looking outward and saying, you've got to change Nancy, you've got to change Teresa, you've got to change Andrea, it's like, wait a minute, what is the need? How am I contributing to the current state, and how might I show up differently? Personal ownership, personal accountability, responsibility, and how might that affect the outcome as a first look, right? Because it's probably a little bit of both you and other people. But what if our first look is at our relationship with ourselves and what we'd like to be different, and then kind of exploring ways we might do that? Because there's not just one way. There's a way that you might most connect with, and it might be different for each of the four of us or any of the listeners. And so that's, again, a conversation connecting to who we are, what our needs are, how we see the situation with how I get to where I want to go from where I am. And it's this journey of going from A to B. And there's all kinds of different pathways we can use to get there. And it's about what's best for you. And so that requires curiosity, conversation, compassion. You talked about self-compassion, right? Being self-compassionate. Hey, I'm not perfect. There's areas I can grow in. To be a better leader, I might need to do these 2 or 3 things. How might I explore that without self-judgment? Because then I'll bring judgment into the conversation about that with other people, and with a little bit of self-acceptance that it's going to be, I'm not perfect at anything, and then at everything. And then also it's going to be a little bit of getting into the growth zone and outside of my comfort zone and being okay with that experience, right? Because the other side is typically awesome, but we kind of stop at the first notion of discomfort, and encouraging people to embrace it rather than kind of back away from it.
Mm. Interesting. What about you ladies? I'm curious about, from a leadership perspective, what are your thoughts in terms of being yourself?
I agree with a lot of what you said, Brian. It's interesting because people react differently when they're put in leadership positions. In my case and in my experience, what leadership did to me was it actually gave me more of a responsibility to be myself. That in itself was another aha moment or epiphany that gave me the courage to find out who I really was, besides becoming a parent. That's really a place to test out what your values are, what you are willing to be represented as, what group you're willing to be associated with, because a lot of people are looking up to you. And if you're associated with another group of leaders that are not necessarily representative of your values, of your integrity, etc., then that says a lot about you. And so that in itself was an exercise to me about what I really stood for. And I had to make some tough decisions, but it was in the end a really great growth moment for me. And I've seen it happen to a lot of people as well.
A lot of times when we step into leadership, there's like zero training. And it's one of the few jobs that doesn't require you to know how to do it before you get it. Like, could you imagine if doctors didn't actually have to learn how to be a doctor, but like, here's the job of doctor, now let's teach you how to do that? I'm like,
here's the scalpel, right?
We would do that, right? But we'll put people in positions of leadership and go, have at it. Impact that they can have over other people is kind of like, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. And I think that one of the things I recognized when I stepped into leadership was this whole notion of, I'm going to now ask people to do stuff. And one, if I'm not willing to do it, I have no right to ask them to do it. But number two is around, like, if I'm muting, if I have self-doubt that are barriers to my performance, if I'm wearing a mask, then why would I ask them ever to take theirs off? I can't. And so then I'm going to have a culture of people who mute, who mask, who have self-doubt that gets in their way. So I believe in leadership, self-doubt has no space. You can't have it if you're going to be a leader, or you have to really be working around it and understanding its biases and influences and barriers to you as an individual. It can't be in the driver's seat when you're a leader. You've got to take care of that stuff before you take that role.
That's actually really interesting. So my experience has been is that sometimes, so when you think about self-doubt, and I'm going to use leadership just because that's a conversation we're talking about. So self-doubt with a leader, I believe that it exists even with seasoned leaders. And I believe what happens is you can work through it at a certain point, and then it can always come back, right? Like as we grow, as we stretch and stuff, like it comes back. So I totally agree with you, Teresa, that being very aware of it is so important, so that you can realize that, okay, I know that this is something I'm prone to. And so knowing that I'm prone to that, what is it that I need to work on so it does not adversely affect my team, the outcomes that we want to produce, where we want to go as a company, like all of those things. But I have kind of found that you can kind of be like, get out of the driver's seat, and then you get onto the driver's seat, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, but I want to get back into, like, it can almost be this ongoing thing that happens. And as long as you're aware that that is what's happening and kind of have things in place to work through that, it's possible. It's harder. I'm not saying it's easy. It's actually very hard to do. But I just find like that's the reality. Like, I'm thinking about myself. I'm actually thinking about even not myself. I'm thinking about leaders that I've worked with who are good leaders. And I know that this is what they're struggling with. Like, I think that's the reality of it. And I feel that might be sometimes also the reason why people put on the mask, is that I can't let you know that I'm struggling with this because I haven't worked it all out. Let me work it all out. And then I'm going to be a perfect leader. And I don't think that exists. Like, I just don't feel like that's the reality.
Yeah, no. And I think the distinction to be clear on is it doesn't get to drive.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have that element of power over you. And so I agree. You can be an exceptional leader, a great leader, and self-doubt will creep in because doubt is part of our expansion outside of our comfort zone, is going, I'm not really sure I know how to do that yet. Well, that's doubt right there. You're like, yeah, but it's not crippling doubt.
Yes.
It's not a barrier to me moving forward. It's not driving my decision making or any of that kind of stuff that's really important for me to move forward and for me to be willing to learn the things I need to learn to then go, yeah, okay, I could do it. I have to be able to stockpile the objectivity to say, I've been in this position before. I've heard this before. It's common when I stretch. Okay, that means I now have to get a mentor, take a class, read a book, watch a TED Talk, engage in a conversation with other people, try, fail, try again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Self-doubt is just part of, sorry, Brian.
No, please go ahead.
Self-doubt is just part of being a human. And what I find fascinating is that leaders in particular, and from what I've seen, try so hard to be perfect and not be human, not show their vulnerable sides, not show their emotions. And, thus we're trying to pretend we are something we're not, and then we're exhausted, but we're human. So it's crazy.
Yes.
It also puts us out of reach. So when we pretend to be like this for our people, it puts us out of reach to them. And that's a huge disservice as a leader, because as a leader,
right,
the only thing that qualifies you is that people are following.
Hopefully.
I love what you guys are sharing there. It's awesome. And so I'd like to come back to the self-doubt piece, right? So think about leaders as they get towards the top of the organization and the expectations of others, right? The expectations, the leader has all this knowledge and wisdom. They know all this stuff. They're going to maybe, they're sort of, and the distance that Teresa was talking about, the further the distance, depending on the leader, they can create that distance or they can bridge that distance. And so there's fewer people when you get to the top, when you have self-doubt, that you feel like you can talk about. So in terms of working with somebody like a coach or somebody else and building those relationships, even more important, the more successful you are, right? It may be counterintuitive. And so thinking about leadership and self-doubt, and back to what Andrea was pointing us to, it's vulnerability, right? That's human. And so just because someone is positionally higher up in an organization, when do they lose their humanity? At what level in your career do you say, oh, no more humanity for you? And so it's like I think a lot of it is mindset and kind of conditioning. And so what about being a CEO prevents us from having lunch with the people that just joined the company? I saw this happen in my former company, where it was an intentional thing where leadership would meet with the new college hires off the campus, or have group meetings on a regular basis to connect with the employees. And then previous regimes, there was this ivory tower sort of notion there too, where people felt disconnected. And think about all the things we care about: engagement, productivity, contribution, all the things that are sort of things organizations are looking to improve. How the leader tends to show up or chooses to show up can either make it more disconnected or bridge the gap. And so I think it's really important in terms of this conversation around self-doubt is recognizing and identifying it, right? And then just realizing doesn't have to be paralyzing, because you've got these different options for how to kind of have conversations and work through that and work with your people in terms of empowering them to help you instead of feeling you've got to do it all yourself, which is very daunting.
Yeah. And it brings me back to what Andrea had talked about at the very beginning around this idea of survival, right? And so I do feel like that's where we end up going, is like, I need to survive whatever, right? Like this kind of wanting to belong in that sense. There was this, there was this consultant who was leading I'm going to say meeting, I don't know what, workshop or something, with a whole bunch of like senior level leaders, right? And so he asked this question among all the leaders, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but he asked the question around the lines of, how many of you are petrified that someone's going to find out you don't know? You don't know what you think you know, what you think you should know, or you don't know enough. And it started with like a couple of hands like this, and everybody put up their hand. And I think what that did was create safety in that space. And we do need to have a safe space. And I totally understand why sometimes for leaders, it's like, well, I can't let everybody know that I don't know, because then they're going to be like, what the hell do we have you in that position for then, right? Like, that's the conversation that's happening in the mind. Whereas the reality is that everybody is sitting around there going like, oh God, don't ask me, or don't probe this anymore, because I actually don't know what I think. And if you found out that I don't know, you might see me differently. It's just interesting that we all are battling that same conversation. If we would just kind of feel safe, and I think it might just require one person to create that safety. And I think that question from him and the first two people who raised their hand created a safe space for everyone else to go like, oh, like that's me as well, right? I do feel that's what happens for a lot of leaders. And I think about a lot of newer leaders, and I think back to when I first started, that's what it was. It's like, I just didn't feel safe to be like, I don't know what you're asking me to do. And I'm like scared. If I do this, you're all going to find out, why did we put her in here? Like, why is she doing this job? So, and I really didn't feel safe. And I think it's over the years. And I think that journey that you had, Andrea, like, it speaks to me, is like, it's over the years that getting comfortable in my skin to be like, I actually don't know. And I'm feeling completely okay telling you I don't know. Right. And if that means you don't feel I'm equipped, then so be it. But I really don't know. I can make something up right now if you want me to, but I don't know, right? But that safety thing, I feel like that's really what's missing a lot of times. And leaders just don't feel like, because now they're no longer part of the gang. So now I'm in this space. Like, so I feel there's a need, as you said, Brian, for how do you start creating a space as you move up in leadership, expand your influence. You need to continue to have a community or a group that you can connect with there and create safety, right, for each other. Otherwise, we're all just going to be pretending to know everything and know nothing.
Yeah. It's the first thing I talk to when I'm training leaders. It's one of the first things I talk to them about, is the reality of leadership is just like grade 9 science. When you got those microscopes and you put the slides in and you could flick it and it just magnified things bigger and bigger and bigger. The more you step up the chain in leadership, the bigger the magnification of you. Your visibility gets huge. So in your first step of leadership, there's more eyes on. All of a sudden, instead of just your peer beside you or your manager, 2 eyes on. Now I become a leader. I've got the 10 people under me paying attention, plus my manager, plus my peers. It's exponential how it magnifies. And if you aren't vocal in like, look, I'm your leader, and I'm chosen to be your leader because of these qualities, not because of this. I'm not your leader because I know all and can do all, and now I'm Oz behind the curtain, right? It's like, no, you remove the curtain from Oz and you kind of go, oh, now we actually see what's in there. So the first thing I do with them is I talk to them about, you need to talk to your people about what it means to you to be a leader, not what they think leadership means. Because if you try and do that, you're going to crash and burn every single time. So you have to talk to them about, I'm not going to know everything, but guess what I will do and can do? I will find answers for you. I will connect you with people that do know. My job is to be a coach for you, but that doesn't mean I'm always going to be the coach position. I might find a peer. I might find someone in another department. That's my job as your leader. Right. My job isn't to be all to all.
Right.
And that's a reality I don't think is explain to leaders when they step into leadership. So when they step in, they think this is what it is, because what we see other leaders doing is this facade. They don't get to be in the room with the table of people going, I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Yes.
And Teresa, to add to that too, is like back to your point about when people become leaders, they're not given any training. So, hey, they're just operating, hey, I was really good as a high-level technical person, so I'm going to bring that approach to leadership, and I have to be able to do everything. And I remember back to transitioning into a manager role, delegation was difficult for me because I was a doer. And so these type of things we take for granted in terms of being a doer or getting things done, or the expectation we have to mindset around, I've got to get this done, sort of may get in the way of us becoming an effective leader. So we've got to learn that, right? And so absent any training, it's an experiential learning, which may be more painful. And as you get more eyes on you too, your relationship with the notion of failure becomes even more important, and the expectation around failure, creating your conditions, right, becomes even more important. What are your bosses then expecting of you? What kind of conversations you're having with them in terms of, hey, you're needing this, being kind of vulnerable about what you need because you haven't had the training or the experience around that to create the conditions for you to be successful, but also for the team to be successful and to produce better results.
Yeah. You know, what's funny is I'm thinking about this, and the challenge that comes up here is a lot of times why someone is moved up into the leading of a team is because they were really good at the team player role. And so there's a lot of confusion then to be like, well, do you want me to just do more of what I was doing? Because I was really good at that, right? And so there's this adjustment factor that's needed. And just bringing it back to the training, like training somebody to be a leader. I mean, it's a journey, right? And I feel more so what's needed is helping people to understand that it's a process, that you will not actually just become this great leader. Like, that's not what it's going to be. You're going to learn through the doing of it as well. So I think there's opportunity for those who are in their existing, like whatever, let's say whatever role you're in. If you're looking to develop leadership, you start it before you're actually sitting in any position, because the opportunity is that you could actually, the behaviors that are needed are valuable no matter what role you're sitting in. You don't have to be wearing a title to be able to do those things. And so it's kind of like conditioning and learning those things along the way. And also the fact that, you know, you will guaranteed make mistakes. Like, guaranteed you're going to start to do something and you're going to start feeling it from your team to be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, you know, well, that doesn't work for us. Or you're going to try and delegate something and people are like, I don't want to do that. You do it, right? So things like that is reality. And just to be, I like what you said about Brian, that kind of the first thing is like, get comfortable with it. You're going to fail and it's going to be really bumpy. Just the part of that's shifting, that's happening. I think that's the part that is a big reality check. When you take the role on, all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, like this is not what I thought it was. I thought everyone's going to like me sitting in this role. I mean, I've been doing so great all this while. So I feel like we raise people up, like we recognize something in them, put them into some other role, but don't tell them, you know what, now you don't continue doing that. You did really well there. Don't continue that. That's not why we put you in here. That gets missed a lot of times. So people are just like, I'm just going to keep doing what I was really good at, what I got really recognized for. And that's where a lot of burnout, I think, happens early for leaders is that. And then that's where you start wearing masks. I'm like, okay, well, let's start being somebody else that you want me to be. What would you like me to do at this point, right? So I think that's one of the challenges that I can see.
Yeah, and Nancy, would you help me come up for me is this notion of the chameleon, right? So what do we want to do when we're put into a leadership role? We want to please everybody. We want to be successful, right? And so then if we haven't adapted or created our leadership style or what we stand for as a leader yet, and we're still in growth mode there, we don't know how we want to be as a leader. So we're just identifying, hey, how can I be successful in this situation? So we're being the chameleon and kind of trying to please everybody. And think about the impact on that, on the people you lead. There's no consistency. There's no kind of rock that they can, even if it's in bad times when things aren't going well, that they can rely on. Oh, I know kind of what's going to happen with this leader. And have you guys experienced anything like that in terms of someone that is sort of just in the moment pleasing and trying to adapt to the situation rather than standing in their own authenticity because they may not have developed that yet?
A lot. I mean, to the point where they even change accents and the way they speak when they're talking to people.
Wow.
Who are you today? Yeah.
So, came to mind me was like Austin Powers. Like I can't remember, but I just like I want to do the rest of this interview with my pinky finger.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point, and it's interesting because people assume that. I mean, I think there's a fine line between empathy and knowing how to adjust your communication and the way you portray yourself to be comfortable with whoever you're speaking with, and then just losing yourself completely in that process. I think so many people, I'm not going to generalize all, but so many people are so worried about how they're going to show up that they forget who they're showing up as. They forget themselves in the process, but I've seen that a lot, to your point.
Okay, so like annual spending, like I believe it's Forbes magazine or something like that. So annual spending on leadership development is $166 billion in the US alone. Mm-hmm. So I'm the outlier, I'm the Canadian.
Me too, I'm a Canadian.
All right, Nancy, I'm so sorry. But I'm pretty sure, when we look at companies, if the US is spending $166 billion, others are spending billions of dollars in leadership training. And in this conversation, I'm asking myself the question, why the hell are we spending so much money in training leaders? It's because we're promoting people who aren't leaders. That's why. We're promoting performers and individual contributors. Then we got to spend so much money to train them to be a leader instead of promoting people.
Wait, standing ovation of
that. Who are naturally leading, right? There's this interesting, when I think about, I only have my life as sort of the center of comparison, right? Of thinking about, why did I get to be successful as a leader? In grade 5, I asked to be on the basketball team because I loved playing basketball. But in grade 5, you weren't allowed to be on the basketball team. You had to wait to grade 6. So I had to convince the basketball coach that I could make it on the team. And so I had to demonstrate my skills, demonstrate my team capacity, all that sort of stuff. In grade 6, I was captain of the team. Whoop, whoop. Super happy, but I loved this position. I was captain of the basketball team, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, not grade 9, grade 10, 11, 12, OAC. I was sent to Ontario leadership course in grade 11. I was a counselor, my first managerial job when I was 17. Like, the leadership skills were part of me, part of who I was as a character, nurtured when I was younger by people who were like, oh, there's something here, nurtured. I took the opportunities because I was connected. And I know that I was a good leader because of all of that. Not just because you're like, I'm a good leader, pat on the back. I put a lot of work and effort into cultivating knowledge, assimilating information. I had tons of coaches, learned everything possible from them. What I learned from parenting, I put into leadership. What I learned from leadership, I put into parenting. What I learned from being an athlete, I put into leadership. Like all of these things, there are tons of people out there who are natural leaders, just no one's paying attention to them because they aren't bringing in the bucks. They aren't contributing the biggest to the KPI, but because we're looking at KPIs that are only measuring bottom line dollars. We're not looking at the KPIs that are related to engagement, that are related to coaching someone to greater performance. Who was the one who got you to be so good? Oh, Karen over here. She works beside me. She's always mentioning what I'm really good at. And that's why I got so good at what I'm doing. Who are the people others are naturally following within your workplace? Those are your leaders.
Right.
Love that, Teresa, in terms of where we might look that we may not be doing a good job of now in terms of recognizing leadership. How do we recognize leaders? Like, you've told your story and it's very clear along the way. You had an awareness of yourself in terms of being a leader, but others noticed you and you got exposed to mentors and programs. What about within a workplace, right? We're so performance driven and KPI and all this stuff, and we promote based on performance, like we've been talking about, and people aren't ready. And then they get dinged for not being ready, yet they weren't prepared for it, or they may not be natural leaders. But what if we started being able to notice better as parents, as family members, as community members, as teachers, whatever role we might play as adults, and supporting the growth, even if it's not our own kids, it's just people in the community. Hey, you should think about going to whatever leadership experience might be beneficial to you, so that we can cultivate and build more better leaders, because there are people that may gravitate more naturally to it. And even if they naturally might, they may not like it. But what if we start as a community of adults being able to recognize it better? How might that be different for schools, workplaces, communities, families?
Well, the ripple impact too of plucking that performer out of that job and saying, you're good at this, now let's put you into leadership. When they're not a leader, is all of a sudden they lose all of their engagement, all of their authenticity, all of who they are, because now they're in a job, they're like, this is not me. But someone thinks I'm supposed to be me. So this imposition of, hey, you were good at what you did, that means you should lead. No, it doesn't mean I should lead. It means I should keep doing what I'm doing because I'm hyper engaged here. But the only way sometimes workplaces will allow people to make more money or get more recognition is to take the next step into leadership. So if we fix how we reward and recognize people that are performing in other ways than just promoting, then we can solve the problem of the only way for me to get more from my career. I can say no to promotion. I don't have to take the leadership job. It's not the only one I got. So if I know I'm not a leader, I don't have to feel like I'm forced to say yes to that in order to grow my career. I could say yes to other things that don't require me to step outside of my talents.
I love that, Teresa. I so agree with that. It just got me thinking that that's another aspect of us trying to not let us be ourselves. Like in the workplace, it's not letting us play to our strengths and what we're able to do, and putting us in a mold that we don't want to go. And why is that mold of vice president, president, CEO, manager the ideal? Why can't my title be the utmost greatest thing that's ever happened to me? Because that's me. So I think I agree with you. And I think it's also about redefining what leadership is and redefining what success is. Because success, I think more and more that it's just very personal and very subjective.
This has now got me thinking for a future topic, which is natural leader versus a nurtured leader. I think there's a lot to explore there, because there is definitely, it's like schools of thought on both sides of that, to be like, what would that look like? And, I'm sure even with experience, so I would say keep in mind for future conversation, perhaps the 4 here again.
Volume 2.
Yeah, volume 2, compared with all your thoughts. I think I mentioned this in another call that we were on, goal like guide to whatever you want to do as a leader. But one of the things in there Kim Scott talks about is this idea of, as you said, Teresa, like paths for progression, right? For somebody, like trajectory of growth, and then recognizing that you need both. You need what she calls rock stars and superstars on your team. And so rock stars are the ones who, they're the rock. They hold things down. They are exceptional at what they do. They are subject matter experts and they love what they do. Superstars are the ones that are like, you know what, I'm going to be here 1 year, 2 years, and my goal, I'm going to do exceptionally well. And then I'm propelling to the next thing. And you need both of those people on your teams. What I also liked about what she said was, do not bucket them now to be like forever a superstar is a superstar and forever a rock star is a rock star. Sometimes things happen in your life that cause you to say, right now where I'm at, I need to be a rock star. I do not have the space or energy to be a superstar. I think what happens sometimes in organizations, they'll say, well, Teresa said no to that, so I don't think she's interested in taking that on anymore. And I'm like, well, that's not maybe the case that we'll have. Like, have a conversation. If you're seeing skills and you're seeing things in her that you're like, those are leadership qualities, and have that conversation. I feel sometimes we're just so quick to make decisions about that's the only way, and she said no or he said no, and there's no other options for those people. So I do think there's an opportunity for a future conversation around this, which would be awesome. We have we're kind of getting kind of to the last few minutes of our hour. So I wanted to just say even as a closing thought, curious from all of you, as you think about the people who are listening into this conversation and kind of joining in, what might you leave people with as they think about this idea, even considering for themselves, this thought of like being myself versus choosing to put on a mask or choosing to be someone else in order to achieve, to get success or something? What might be some words that you would leave people with, either through your experience or just kind of as advice for people? I'd be curious to hear from everyone.
I would say that your self tells you when you're doing it. So if you can get in tune with what it sounds like, but more so what it feels like when you're not being authentic, and then pay attention to it. The first step is, oh, that's what that is. Now that people who are listening may have heard that and kind of went, I think I know what that sounds like or what that feels like, how my body signals me when, like, I describe it as, oh, I just felt like it felt awful and I didn't want to be around it. Mm. And so if you know what that feels like to you, for some people, it might be a lot more subtle. For some people, it might be a lot more intense than even that icky feeling, right? That start paying attention to that and start honoring that. That would be so honoring it to me means that say no to whatever it is that's being asked of you that is not you.
Well said, Teresa. Mine would be something that I've actually been following myself, which is life is short. If not today, when? And will you regret it if you're not truly you or a certain way? What is it that keeps you up at night in a good way that you've always been dying to do? What would you do if you didn't have fear? Mm. So it's like asking yourself and challenging yourself all those questions when you're feeling that in your gut, that what you're doing or how you're representing yourself isn't right. Awareness is key, but just keep having conversations with yourself. Will eventually become a habit and eventually spark out who you're trying to be.
That's awesome.
I guess what I'll pick up on is, to Teresa's point, is being aware of and noticing when you may be muting yourself or suppressing yourself, or are you noticing incongruence between how you're feeling and what's being asked of you. Also, when you're a leader and you have a mindset around a person, do you get curious? Or I encourage you to get curious about what is it that they want? How do they want to bring their contributions? And not how do you see them bringing contributions that you want to help them see what you see for their next step, but where would they like to go next? We see a lot of people now changing careers and doing things because they're following more of what energizes them. And so if we think of high performance and high energy, sometimes we focus so myopically on performance, we're missing the energy piece of that. What if we didn't, right? What if we looked at what lights people up so we can unleash human greatness and expand human capacity? I guess I'll leave it with that.
I'm kind of taking notes about everything that all of you said. The thing that's really standing out for me is that idea, like bringing it back to that self-acceptance piece where we started it off, and the idea of tuning in. I feel maybe from a lot of us, what happens is the idea of being somebody else becomes comfortable because we are not uncomfortable. But we're not tuned into ourselves enough to recognize the discomfort of it. So it's a softer discomfort, and it's just something we tolerated, right? Like you've tolerated, it's like just this, that little piece of gunk that you have sitting there that just been sitting there, it just sits there. It's not a big deal, right? We just kind of become tolerant of it. And that's sad in a way, as I think about it, is that you're kind of the best of you is not showing up because you've just tolerated the discomfort of it. And so the idea of tuning in is really sticking out for me. And it's actually a little bit of a reconfirmation for me because it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. So just bringing that conversation around again, it's been awesome to have this conversation with all of you, because that's what's coming up for me, is just tune in. And if you can figure out when something doesn't feel right, question it, right? Like find out why does it not feel right and question it, and don't just say, man, it's just, it just is kind of thing. Just question it and find out, and then make a decision as to who you really are. Because I just imagine if all of us actually showed up that way and we accepted that everyone else is going to show up that way, how cool would that be, right? And that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. It just means we're like, I'm okay, like that's fine, like there's just a safety that comes with that. It would be a pretty awesome place. I loved having this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much, Teresa, Andrea, Brian. Like I said, I feel like there's a 2.0 to this conversation that we should be having at some point. And just for those who are joining, kind of listening into the conversation with us, would love to kind of just find out from you, just get involved in the conversation. What has been your experience with this? What have we not talked about? Like, what is something else that's come up for you that we haven't talked about that you feel should be part of the conversation around, showing up as ourselves? I'd be curious, Andrea and Teresa, how, if anybody was curious to kind of just connect with you to get into a conversation about this, what might be the best way that they could reach out to either one of you?
Okay. I actually have on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. It's A Sanchez 16 is how you can find me. And I actually have a Twitter chat called Daring to Be Yourself, every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's a way to connect on a daily basis with a great community.
Perfect.
I prefer like handwritten mail.
Great. So what's your mailing address?
It takes a little bit longer, but man, when I go to the mailbox and it's there, ooh, it jazzes me up. LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, Teresa Quinlan. Teresa at iqeqtq.com. Those are great ways to get in touch with me.
Perfect. And so I know, Brian, you've shared in the past LinkedIn. Any other ways that you feel?
LinkedIn, come back every Wednesday for these We Can Do Better conversations and contribute. We'd love to hear about your perspective on these topics. And Brian Kelly, leadershipcoaching.com, if you want to visit my website. Love to chat and connect with everybody who's like-hearted and looking to create better.
Awesome. Well, yeah, likewise for me, LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. And yeah, again, would love to kind of hear in the comments, like what are some things that other people have thought as they've been following along the conversation. So thank you, Teresa, Andrea, Brian, for a fantastic conversation. I'm walking away with a lot that I have to process and do something with. So
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you.